The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Martha Wilson's front porch as she rocked gently in her weathered chair, a steaming cup of chamomile tea warming her hands. At 78, Martha had lived in this farmhouse on the outskirts of Pine Ridge for over 50 years. The last 15 of those years had been quiet ones since her husband, Tom, passed away from a heart attack while tending to their small vegetable garden. The weather had turned bitter cold in the last few days, unusual for early November in this part of the country. Martha pulled her thick cardigan tighter around her shoulders as she watched gray clouds gathering on the horizon. The local news had been talking about a major storm system for days now, with predictions growing more severe by the hour. Looks like they might be right this time, Martha murmured to herself, noticing how the wind had picked up. Bending the bare branches of the old oak trees that lined her long gravel driveway, she finished her tea and stood up slowly, her knees protesting the movement. Inside, the farmhouse was warm and smelled of fresh-baked bread and cinnamon. Martha had spent the morning baking, a habit she'd kept up even after it was just her alone at the dining table. The neighbors and church folks appreciated her baking, and it gave her a reason to keep her hands busy. Martha walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the darkening sky. The first few snowflakes had begun to fall, delicate and unhurried. According to the weather report, this wouldn't remain gentle for long. The radio on her countertop crackled as the announcer's voice cut through with a special bulletin, the national weather. Service has upgraded the winter storm warning to a blizzard warning for Pine Ridge County and surrounding areas. Residents are advised to stay indoors and off the roads. Expected snowfall has been increased to 18 to 24 inches, with wind gusts up to 50 miles per hour, creating whiteout conditions. This is shaping up to be the worst storm system to hit our area in over 30 years. Martha sighed and reached for the notepad where she'd written her storm preparations list. She'd been through bad storms before and knew what to do. The pantry was stocked. She had enough firewood inside to last several days if the power went out. Flashlights with fresh batteries sat on the counter, and the old generator in the shed had been checked last week by Joe Harmon's boy from down the road. Better fill some containers with water just in case, she said to herself, pulling out several large pitchers from the cabinet. As darkness fell, the snow began to come down harder. Martha drew the curtains, turned on the lamps in the living room, and settled into her armchair with a worn paperback mystery. Outside, the wind howled around the corners of the house, rattling the windows in their frames. The old farmhouse creaked and groaned as if complaining about the weather. By 8 o'clock, the storm had intensified dramatically. Martha had just put another log on the fire when the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. Right on schedule, Martha muttered, not particularly surprised. The rural power lines never held up well in these conditions. She reached for the flashlight on the side table and made her way to the kitchen to light several candles she'd placed around the house earlier. The warm glow created dancing shadows on the walls as she returned to the living room. Martha added another log to the fireplace, thankful for its warmth and light. She wrapped herself in the quilt she'd made years ago for their 40th anniversary and settled back into her chair. The howl of the wind was the only sound apart from the crackling fire. In moments like these, the emptiness of the house seemed to expand, reminding her of all she'd lost. She missed Tom most during storms. He'd always made them feel like adventures rather than inconveniences, telling stories by candlelight and making shadow puppets on the wall for their daughter, Beth, who now lived 3 states away with her own family. Martha smiled at the memory, though it ached a little too. The old grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times, barely audible over the storm's fury. Martha was considering turning in early when she heard something that made her sit up straight. It wasn't the wind or the house settling. It sounded like an engine. Multiple engines, their rumble carrying through the storm. Martha frowned and set aside her book. Nobody in their right mind would be out driving in this weather. She stood and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peer outside. The snow was coming down in thick, swirling sheets, but through the white haze she could make out headlights at the end of her long driveway. "Who on earth?" Martha whispered, squinting to see better. The headlights were moving slowly up the driveway, obviously struggling against the mounting snowdrifts. As they got closer, Martha realized they weren't car headlights at all. They were motorcycles. Several of them, their riders hunched against the biting wind and snow. Martha counted at least 10, maybe more before they disappeared from view. Presumably pulling around to the side of her house where the barn offered some shelter from the wind, her heart began to beat faster. Not entirely from fear, but certainly from surprise. Who would be riding motorcycles in a blizzard, and why were they coming to her isolated farmhouse? She briefly considered her options. The phone lines were likely down along with the power. Her nearest neighbor was over a mile away. At 78, she wasn't exactly in fighting shape if these were troublemakers. Oh, for heaven's sake, Martha scolded herself. They're probably just people caught in the storm looking for shelter. Still, she retrieved Tom's old baseball bat from the hall closet just to be safe. It had been years since she'd needed to defend herself, but growing up with 3 older brothers had taught her to stand her ground. The heavy knock that came minutes later was almost drowned out by the wind. Martha approached the front door cautiously, bat in hand. "Who's there?" she called out firmly. "Ma'am," a deep voice responded, sounding strained against the howling wind. "We're sorry to bother you, but we're stuck in this storm. Our bikes can't make it any farther in this snow. We saw your lights, well, we saw candlelight, and hoped you might let us use your phone to call for help." Martha hesitated. "The phone lines are down, same as the power." There was a pause then. "Could we at least warm up for a bit before trying to find somewhere else? It's brutal out here." Martha stood silently for a moment, weighing her options. Her mother had always said her kind heart would get her in trouble someday. Tom used to joke that she'd bring home every stray animal in person if he let her. Maybe he wasn't wrong. "How many of you are there?" she asked. 15 of us, ma'am. We were headed back from a charity run when the storm hit faster than expected. Roads got too bad for the bikes. 15 strangers, motorcycle riders caught in a blizzard." Martha took a deep breath and sent a quick prayer heavenward. Then she unlatched the door and pulled it open. The wind nearly yanked it from her grasp as snow swirled into the entryway. Standing on her porch, covered in snow and looking half-frozen, was a mountain of a man. His beard was crusted with ice, his leather jacket inadequate against the elements. Behind him, through the curtain of snow, Martha could make out more figures, all similarly underdressed for the conditions. "You'd better come in before you freeze to death," Martha said, stepping aside. "But wipe your feet. I just cleaned these floors yesterday." The big man's face, red from cold, broke into a relieved smile. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." He turned and waved to the others. One by one, they filed into Martha's home, a procession of leather, chains, tattoos, and ice-crusted beards. Each one nodded respectfully to Martha as they entered, murmuring thanks. They were massive men for the most part, with a few women among them just as tough-looking as their male counterparts. Their leather vests bore patches Martha didn't recognize, but the words Hell's Angels were prominently displayed. Martha felt a momentary flutter of apprehension. She'd heard stories about motorcycle gangs, of course, but as she looked at their faces, exhausted, cold, and openly grateful, she saw only people in need. The last one through the door was a woman with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of hard years. She paused beside Martha. "We won't be any trouble," she said quietly, "and we're grateful. Not many would open their door to us, especially looking like this." She gestured to her vest and the patches on it. Martha smiled and closed the door against the storm. "In weather like this, we're all just people trying to stay warm," she said simply. "Now let's get you all defrosted. I've got soup on the stove and plenty of blankets." As she led the unlikely group of guests toward her living room, Martha couldn't help but smile to herself. Tom would have gotten a kick out of this situation. 15 Hell's Angels in their farmhouse during a blizzard. It certainly wasn't how she'd expected to spend her evening. But as she watched them gather gratefully around her fireplace, their massive frames somehow making her spacious living room seem small, Martha felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, the pleasant bustle of a house full of people. And despite their intimidating appearance, there was something about their respectful demeanor that put her at ease. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside Martha Wilson's farmhouse, an unexpected night was just beginning. Martha bustled about her kitchen, grateful for the gas stove that still worked despite the power outage. The large pot of vegetable soup she'd made that morning was heating up nicely, filling the room with a homey aroma that fought against the chill seeping through the old farmhouse walls. In the living room, 15 Hell's Angels awkwardly occupied whatever space they could find. Some sat on the floor, backs against the wall, while others perched uncomfortably on furniture built for people much smaller than they were. The fireplace cast flickering shadows across their weather-worn faces, their leather cuts and vests still, dripping melted snow onto Martha's handmade rag. Ruggs, the big man who had knocked on her door. First, he'd introduced himself as Buck, stood in the doorway, between the kitchen and living room watching Martha work. "Ma'am, we can't thank you enough," he said, his deep voice surprisingly soft. "Not many folks would let us in, especially not 15 of us looking like this." He gestured to his patch-covered vest with a self-deprecating smile. Martha waved a wooden spoon at him dismissively. "Nonsense. What was I supposed to do? Let you freeze to death in my driveway?" She opened a cabinet and started pulling out bowls. "Now make yourself useful and carry these to the table. We'll have to eat in shifts. I don't have enough chairs for everyone." Buck looked momentarily startled at being given orders, but then his face broke into a wide grin. "Yes, ma'am." He took the stack of mismatched bowls from her hands with surprising gentleness, his massive tattooed arms handling them like they were made of glass. In the living room, the other bikers had begun to relax slightly. A woman with a long silver braid, she'd introduced herself as Maggie, was examining the photographs on Martha's mantelpiece. "These your kids?" she asked as Martha entered with a tray of spoons and napkins. Martha nodded. "Just the one daughter, Beth, the others are grandchildren." She pointed to a framed school photo. "That's Annie, she's 13 now. And that's little Jack, he's 9. Her face softened. "They live in Colorado. I don't see them as often as I'd like." A tall, lean man with a gray-streaked beard who'd been introduced as Diesel spoke up from his spot by the window. "Storm's getting worse. Visibility's practically zero now." He turned to face the room. "We really lucked out finding your place, ma'am. If we'd been stuck out there much longer," he trailed off, not needing to finish the thought. A younger biker with a shock of red hair under his bandana, they called him Rusty, nodded vigorously. "When my bike went down that last time, I thought we were done for." Couldn't see 2 feet ahead, Martha frowned. "Anyone hurt from that fall?" Rusty shrugged, then winced slightly. "Just banged up. Nothing serious." Martha studied him with the sharp eye of a woman who'd raised a child and taught elementary school for 30 years. "Roll up that sleeve. Let me see." The room went quiet as Rusty glanced at Buck, who gave a small nod. Slowly, Rusty rolled up his sleeve to reveal an angry gash along his forearm. Martha clicked her tongue. "That needs cleaning. I have a first aid kit in the bathroom." She turned to Buck. "The soup needs stirring. Don't let it boil over." As she led Rusty down the hallway, the young biker looked around at the walls lined with framed cross-stitch samplers and family photos. "Nice place you got here," he said awkwardly. Martha pushed open the bathroom door and pulled a large first aid kit from under the sink. "Been in this house 53 years, she said, wetting a clean washcloth. "My husband Tom and I bought it when we got married. Built most of it ourselves." "You live here alone now?" Rusty asked, then immediately looked like he regretted the question. "Sorry, not my business." "It's fine," Martha said, gently cleaning the gash on his arm. "Yes, Tom passed 15 years ago. Heart attack while gardening." She worked methodically, her hands steady despite their age. "This isn't too deep, but you should have it looked at properly when you can. For now, I'll butterfly it closed." Rusty watched her work with a mixture of respect and curiosity. "You a nurse or something?" Martha laughed softly. "Teacher. Elementary school for 30 years. You learn to patch up all sorts of scrapes and bumps in that job." She finished bandaging his arm. "There. That should hold for now." When they returned to the main room, the atmosphere had shifted slightly. Buck was ladling soup into bowls while a few others had found Martha's collection of candles and placed them strategically around the room for better light. Someone had hung their wet jackets near the fireplace to dry, and the circle around the fire had widened to allow more people to feel its warmth. "Hope you don't mind," said a stocky woman with short gray hair who'd been introduced as Rebel. "Figured we'd make ourselves useful instead of just taking up space." "Not at all," Martha replied, genuinely touched. "That's very thoughtful." Dinner was served in 2 shifts, with half the group eating at Martha's dining table while the others waited their turn in the living room. The conversation was stilted at first, with long silences broken only by the clink of spoons against bowls and the howling wind outside. But gradually, as bellies filled with warm soup and homemade bread, the tension began to ease. "This is the best soup I've had in years," declared a burly man with a salt and pepper beard who went by the nickname Doc. Reminds me of my grandmother's. Martha beamed. It's nothing fancy. Just vegetables and herbs from my garden that I canned last summer. You grow your own food? Asked a younger woman named Tink, her arms covered in colorful tattoos. Most of it, Martha said. Tom and I always kept a big garden. Habit I never broke even after he was gone. Now I give a lot of it away to the church food pantry. Buck, who had finished his second bowl, leaned back in his chair, carefully so as not to stress the wooden frame with his bulk. You said your daughter lives in Colorado. You ever think about moving closer to her? A shadow crossed Martha's face. Oh, she's asked me to. Multiple times. But this is home. She gestured around her. Every corner of this place has memories. And I'm still independent enough to manage on my own. Nothing wrong with that, Buck nodded approvingly. Independence matters. After everyone had eaten, Martha declined offers to wash dishes. They'll keep till morning when we have light, and instead directed her unexpected guests to arrange themselves as comfortably as possible for the night. The temperature in the house was dropping as the storm continued to rage, so Martha brought out every blanket, quilt, and afghan she owned. Not enough beds for everyone, I'm afraid, she apologized. But the floor by the fire should be warm enough. Ma'am, Buck said, we've slept in ditches and under overpasses. Your floor is the Ritz-Carlton by comparison. The bikers arranged themselves around the living room, some on cushions they'd pulled from chairs, others simply on the carpet with blankets. Martha insisted that Maggie and Tink take the guest bedroom, while Rebel, who admitted to a bad back, was given the couch. As the night deepened and the fire burned low, conversations died down to murmurs, then to silence broken only by the occasional snore. Martha, wrapped in her favorite quilt in her rocking chair, found herself unable to sleep despite the late hour. The situation was so surreal. Her quiet farmhouse filled with members of the notorious motorcycle club she'd only ever heard about on the news. Yet here they were, respectful and grateful, nothing like the dangerous criminals the media portrayed. She watched Buck add another log to the fire, his movements careful and quiet so as not to disturb those already sleeping. He caught her watching him and moved to sit on the floor near her chair. You should get some rest, he said softly. Been a long day, Martha smiled. At my age, sleep doesn't come as easily as it used to. But I'm fine. She studied him in the firelight. You've been riding with this group a long time? Buck nodded. 26 years. They're family. He looked around at the sleeping forms of his fellow club members. Most people see the patches and the bikes and make assumptions. They don't see the bonds, the brotherhood. People fear what they don't understand, Martha said simply. Always have. True enough. Buck's weathered face creased in a small smile. Though I gotta admit, sometimes those assumptions come in handy. Not many people try to mess with us, Martha chuckled softly. I can imagine. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the wind buffet the house and the occasional crack of the fire. Finally, Buck spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. Why'd you let us in, Martha? Really? Most people would have pretended they weren't home, or called the cops. Martha considered the question. I've lived a long time, she said finally. Long enough to know that people aren't always what they seem on the surface. Tom and I, we believed in helping folks in need. Simple as that. She paused. Besides, I've got a good sense about people. Always have. Buck looked at her with newfound respect. Your husband must have been quite a man. He was, Martha agreed, a wistfulness in her voice. He would have enjoyed this, actually. Tom loved unexpected adventures. She yawned suddenly. Maybe I am getting tired after all. Buck stood up quietly. Get some sleep. We'll figure out next steps in the morning once the storm passes. Martha nodded, feeling her eyelids grow heavy. The last thing she saw before drifting off was Buck draping an extra blanket over an older club member, whose arm bore a faded military tattoo. In that moment, despite their fearsome appearance, she saw only people taking care of each other, and that, to Martha, was what really mattered. Martha woke to the unfamiliar sounds of hushed voices and movement in her kitchen. For a moment she was disoriented, still in her rocking chair by the now smoldering fire. Then the events of the previous night came flooding back. The blizzard, the stranded bikers, the impromptu shelter she'd provided. Sunlight streamed through the windows, reflecting off the snow outside with an almost blinding brightness. The storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed world of pristine white. Martha stretched, her old joints protesting after a night spent in the rocking chair. "Morning." Buck's deep voice came from the doorway. He held a steaming mug in his massive hands. "Hope you don't mind. We found your coffee and got a pot going." He crossed the room and offered her the mug. "Milk, no sugar. Tink said that's how you took it last night." Martha accepted the coffee with surprise. "Thank you." She took a sip. It was perfect. "You all are up early," Buck shrugged. "Most of us don't need much sleep. Club habit, I guess." He glanced toward the kitchen. "Doc and Maggie are fixing breakfast. Hope that's okay too. Figured you might be tired after putting up with all of us." As if on cue, the aroma of frying bacon and brewing coffee wafted in from the kitchen. Martha could hear laughter and the clatter of pans. It had been years since her kitchen had contained that much life. "It's more than okay," Martha said, rising from her chair. "It's nice to have a full house again." In the kitchen, Martha found a scene she could never have imagined 24 hours earlier. Doc, the burly biker with the salt and pepper beard, was expertly flipping pancakes at her stove. Maggie was setting the table while Tink scrambled eggs in a large bowl. The others were scattered around, some clearing snow from her back steps through the kitchen door, others rinsing dishes from the night before. "Morning, Martha," Maggie called cheerfully. "Hope we didn't wake you. Thought we'd make ourselves useful." "You certainly have," Martha said, taking in the bustling scene. "I can't remember the last time I didn't have to make my own breakfast." Rusty, the redhead with the injured arm, was sitting at the table, his bandage freshly changed. "How's the arm feeling?" Martha asked him. "Better, thanks to you," he replied with a grin. "Doc checked it this morning. Says you did a good job cleaning it up." Doc nodded from the stove. "Clean as a hospital would have done. You've got skilled hands, Martha." Breakfast was a lively affair, with all 15 bikers plus Martha crowding around the table and spilling into the living room. The initial awkwardness of the night before had melted away, replaced by a surprising camaraderie. Martha found herself laughing more than she had in years as the bikers shared road stories and club anecdotes. "So there we were," Rebel was saying, gesturing with her fork. "Broken down outside this tiny town in Nevada, and Buck here decides we need to enter their annual chili cook-off to raise money for parts." "Did you win?" Martha asked, intrigued. Buck chuckled. "Third place. Would have won if Diesel hadn't insisted on adding those habaneros. It needed heat." Diesel protested from across the room. "It nearly burned a hole in the judge's stomach," countered Maggie, which sent everyone into fits of laughter. After breakfast, the bikers insisted on cleaning up despite Martha's protests. As they worked, Buck stepped outside to check on their motorcycles and assess the road conditions. He returned with snow clinging to his boots and beard. "Roads are still pretty bad," he reported. "Plows haven't made it out this far yet. Bikes are buried under 2 feet of snow." He looked at Martha. "Looks like you might be stuck with us a little longer if that's all right." "Of course it is," Martha replied without hesitation. "Stay as long as you need to." With the immediate concern of departure settled, the day stretched ahead of them. The power was still out, but Martha's house was warm thanks to the fireplace and wood stove. Outside, the world was quiet, blanketed in snow that sparkled under the clear blue sky. It was Rusty who first noticed the leaking pipe in the downstairs bathroom. "Martha, you got a slow drip under this sink," he called out. "Got tools anywhere? I could take a look." "In the shed out back," Martha replied. "But don't trouble yourself." "No trouble," Rusty interrupted. "I'm a plumber when I'm not riding. Let me earn my keep a little." As Rusty tackled the leaky pipe, other bikers began to notice things around the old farmhouse that needed attention. Diesel, who worked as an electrician, checked Martha's fuse box and explained what would need resetting once the power returned. Tink discovered a loose railing on the back porch and set about fixing it with supplies from Martha's tool shed. By midday, Martha's house had become a hive of activity. Buck and Doc were clearing snow from her long driveway using shovels they'd found in the barn. Rebel and Maggie were in the kitchen, taking inventory of Martha's pantry and making lists of what might be needed once roads were passable again. A few others had climbed onto the roof to check for damage from the storm, after Martha mentioned a persistent leak in the upstairs hallway. Martha found herself sitting at her kitchen table, watching in amazement as these strangers, these intimidating-looking bikers who most people would cross the street to avoid, worked tirelessly to help her. It had been so long since anyone had taken care of things around the house. Since Tom died, she'd managed as best she could, but there were always tasks beyond her abilities or strength. "You don't need to do all this," she said to Maggie, who was measuring coffee into the percolator for a midday brew. Maggie smiled, the lines around her eyes crinkling. "We want to, Martha. You took us in when most would have turned us away." Besides, she glanced out the window at the men shoveling snow. "They're enjoying themselves. Makes them feel useful." After a lunch of sandwiches made from Martha's homemade bread and preserved garden vegetables, Buck found Martha sorting through a pile of mail at her desk in the small study off the living room. He knocked gently on the open door. "Sorry to interrupt," he said. "Wanted to let you know the boys found some loose shingles on your roof. They're patching them up best they can for now, but you'll need proper repairs come spring." Martha sighed, setting down a letter from the bank. Another reminder about her mortgage payments. "Add it to the list," she said with a weak smile. "This old house is falling apart faster than I can keep up with it." Buck's eyes fell on the letter, though he politely didn't mention it. Instead, he leaned against the doorframe, his large frame making the small room seem even smaller. "Been here a long time, you said?" "Over 50 years, Martha nodded. "Raised our daughter here. Had a small farm going at one point. Chickens, a couple of cows, big vegetable gardens." She looked out the window at what was now mostly empty land. "Sold off most of the acreage after Tom passed. Just couldn't manage it all." Buck was quiet for a moment, then asked carefully, "Must be expensive keeping up a place like this on your own?" Martha hesitated, then decided there was no point in pretense. "It's a struggle sometimes," she admitted. "Teacher's pension only goes so far, and the property taxes keep rising. The bank's been, well, let's just say they're not as patient as they once were." Buck frowned. "They giving you trouble?" "Nothing I can't handle," Martha said firmly, though the growing stack of final notices suggested otherwise. She changed the subject. "Tell me more about your club. You do charity rides?" Buck allowed the redirection. "Yeah, several times a year. Children's hospitals, veterans groups, women's shelters. People are usually surprised by that side of us." "I'm not," Martha said simply. "Kindness comes in all packages." By late afternoon, the distant sound of snowplows could be heard, gradually making their way down the county roads. The bikers gathered in Martha's living room to discuss their plans. "Roads should be clear enough by morning for us to get the bikes out," Buck announced. "We can head out after breakfast if that works for you, Martha." Martha felt a surprising twinge of sadness. "Of course. You all must be eager to get home." "Been a nice break, actually," Diesel said. "Best unplanned stop we've had in years." That evening, they shared a hearty dinner of stew made from Martha's preserved vegetables and the last of her beef. The mood was warm, but tinged with the knowledge that their unusual gathering was coming to an end. After dinner, as they sat around the fireplace, Doc pulled out a harmonica and began to play a soft, bluesy tune. Tink's clear voice joined in, singing an old folk song about travelers finding their way home. Martha looked around at these people, strangers just a day ago, who now filled her home with life and laughter. They had patched her roof, fixed her plumbing, repaired her porch, and somehow, without even realizing it, mended something inside her that had been broken since Tom died. The simple joy of human connection. As the music played and the fire crackled, Martha knew that regardless of what came next, this unexpected snowstorm had brought her a gift she never could have anticipated, and one she would never forget. Morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through Martha's kitchen windows. The snow outside glittered like diamond dust, nearly 3 feet deep in places but now solid enough to walk on. The plows had made it through overnight, clearing the main road that ran past the end of Martha's long driveway. The house was filled with the scent of coffee and the sound of quiet conversation as the bikers prepared for departure. Martha stood at the stove flipping pancakes while Maggie fried bacon and Doc scrambled eggs. It felt strangely routine, as if they'd been doing this together for years instead of just 2 days. "Roads are clear enough for the bikes," Buck announced as he came in through the back door, stomping snow from his boots. "Few of the boys are digging them out now. Figure we can head out after breakfast." Martha nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. She'd grown used to the noise and activity, the house feeling alive again after so many years of quiet. "I've packed some sandwiches for your trip," she said, gesturing to a pile of wrapped bundles on the counter. Nothing fancy, just some ham and cheese. You didn't have to do that, Buck said, his gruff voice softening. Nonsense. Can't send people off on empty stomachs. My mother would roll in her grave. Martha flipped another pancake with practiced ease. Besides, it's the least I could do after all the work you all put in yesterday. Breakfast was a more subdued affair than the previous day's meal. The bikers ate heartily, but conversation was minimal, many of them already mentally back on the road. After they finished, they worked together to clean up the kitchen one last time. While the others packed their few belongings and prepared the motorcycles, Buck lingered in the kitchen where Martha was wiping down the counters. Got a minute to talk? He asked quietly. Martha looked up, surprised by his serious tone. Of course. Buck glanced toward the door to make sure they were alone. I couldn't help noticing those bank letters yesterday in your study. He held up a hand when Martha stiffened. Not trying to pry into your business. Just wondering if things are worse than you let on. Martha sighed and set down her dishcloth. For a moment, she considered brushing off his concern with her usual, I can handle it response, but something about Buck's genuine concern broke through her stubborn pride. The truth is, things are tight, she admitted, lowering her voice so the others wouldn't hear. Property taxes went up again last year. The roof needs replacing. Those patches your friends did will help for now, but it won't last another winter. And the bank... She paused, the words difficult to say aloud. The bank sent a final notice last month. If I can't make the back payments by the end of next month, they'll start foreclosure proceedings. Buck's weathered face darkened. How much are we talking about? Martha shook her head. It doesn't matter. It's my problem to solve. Martha, Buck said firmly, after what you did for us, letting us know what you're facing is the least you can do. She hesitated, then named a figure that represented the sum of several missed mortgage payments, plus the overdue property taxes. Buck didn't react visibly, but his eyes narrowed slightly. You tried talking to the bank? Working something out? Every month for the past year, Martha said with a bitter smile. They were patient at first, but now, she shrugged. The house is old. The land is valuable. They'd rather sell to developers than work with an old woman on a fixed income. Buck was quiet for a long moment. You've got family that could help? Your daughter? Beth has her own bills, her own children to put through college, Martha replied firmly. I won't burden her with my problems. She's offered to have me move in with them in Colorado, but... She looked around the kitchen at the walls that had witnessed 50 years of her life. This is home. Every corner holds memories of Tom, of our life together. I'm not ready to leave. Their conversation was interrupted by Diesel poking his head through the door. Bikes are dug out, Buck, ready when you are. Be right there, Buck replied, his eyes still on Martha. After Diesel left, he reached out and gently placed his hand on Martha's shoulder. Thank you for trusting me with this. And for everything else. You're an extraordinary woman, Martha Wilson. Martha felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Oh, go on with you. I just did what anyone would do. Buck shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. No, you didn't, but we can argue about that another time. We should get going before the roads get bad again. Outside, the bikers had lined up their motorcycles at the end of Martha's now shoveled driveway. They were loading saddlebags and checking engines after the long exposure to the cold. When Martha stepped onto her porch, they all stopped what they were doing and gathered around. One by one, they came forward to say goodbye. Rusty showed her his properly bandaged arm and promised to have a doctor look at it when they got back to the city. Maggie gave her a tight hug and slipped a piece of paper into her hand. My phone number. Call any time, day or night. Tink had tears in her eyes as she thanked Martha. Nobody's been that kind to me since my grandma passed. I won't forget it. Doc shook her hand formally, then surprised her by pulling her into a bear hug. You ever need medical attention, you call me first. I might look rough, but I've got 20 years as an EMT under my belt. The goodbyes continued, each biker taking a moment to express their gratitude in their own way. Martha was overwhelmed by the genuine affection in their voices, the respect in their eyes. These people, whom society often feared and avoided, were showing her more kindness than she'd experienced in years. Finally, only Buck remained. He stood on the bottom step of her porch, looking up at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. We won't forget what you did, Martha, he said simply. Not many people see past the patches in the bikes. You saw people who needed help, nothing more or less. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small card with a phone number written on it. "This is my direct line. Anything happens, anything at all, you call. Day or night." Martha took the card, touched by his earnestness. "I'll be fine, Buck, but thank you." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "We'll be in touch." Before she could ask what he meant, he turned and walked to his motorcycle, the last in line. Martha stood on her porch as the bikers started their engines, the combined roar breaking the winter quiet. They raised their hands in a final salute. Then one by one they pulled away, heading down the plowed road until the rumble of their engines faded into the distance. The silence that followed was profound. Martha stood in the sudden stillness, the only sound the occasional drip of melting snow from her roof. Her house, which had been so full of life and noise for the past 2 days, now felt emptier than it ever had before. She went back inside and began to tidy up, though the bikers had left everything remarkably clean. As she worked, she found small things they'd done that she hadn't noticed. A loose floorboard fixed in the hallway, a squeaky hinge oiled, the fireplace swept and restocked with wood from her pile outside. Each discovery was like a small gift, a reminder of their presence. By evening, Martha sat in her rocking chair by the fireplace, a cup of tea cooling on the side table as she leafed through a photo album. The power had come back on around noon, but she preferred the fireplace's warm glow. The house was immaculate, everything in its place, yet something fundamental had shifted. The walls that had felt like a sanctuary now seemed to echo with absence. "Well, Tom," she said aloud, looking at a photo of her late husband standing proudly in front of their house when it was newly built. "That was certainly an adventure you would have enjoyed." She smiled at the photograph. 15 Hell's Angels in our living room. Who would have thought? Outside, the winter night was clear and cold, stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky. Martha rocked gently, reflecting on the strange twist of fate that had brought those 15 people into her life. She had no way of knowing that miles away, in a crowded clubhouse, Buck was addressing his fellow club members, telling Martha's story and setting in motion events that would change her life forever. The morning after the Hells Angels departed, Martha found herself moving slowly through her daily routine. The house felt strangely empty, the silence almost oppressive after 2 days of deep voices and laughter. She made her usual single cup of coffee and toast, taking both to the kitchen table where she'd sat surrounded by bikers just yesterday. A fresh layer of snow had fallen overnight, covering the tire tracks left by the motorcycles. Looking out her kitchen window, Martha could almost believe she'd imagined the whole thing. 15 leather-clad bikers taking shelter in her home during the worst blizzard in decades. But the fixed, leaky faucet, the patched roof, and the neatly stacked firewood were real enough. By mid-morning, Martha bundled up to check her mailbox at the end of the long driveway. The rural mail carrier had managed to get through, and her box contained the usual assortment of bills, advertisements, and a letter from her daughter in Colorado. She tucked everything under her arm and trudged back through the snow, her boots leaving the only marks on the pristine white surface. Back inside, she set aside the bills for later, no sense ruining a perfectly good day with those worries, and opened her daughter's letter. Beth wrote about the children's school activities, her husband's promotion, and, inevitably, another gentle suggestion that Martha consider selling the farmhouse and moving to Colorado. "We have that lovely guest suite downstairs," Beth wrote. "You'd have your privacy but wouldn't have to deal with all the maintenance of that big old house. Please just think about it, Mom." Martha sighed, folding the letter carefully and placing it back in its envelope. Beth meant well, but she didn't understand. This house wasn't just walls and a roof. It was 50 years of memories, the last place she felt Tom's presence. Leaving would feel like losing him all over again. She spent the afternoon baking bread and making a batch of vegetable soup. Old habits were hard to break, even when cooking for one. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across her snowy yard, Martha sat in her rocking chair by the fireplace with a worn paperback mystery novel. The house creaked and settled around her, its familiar sounds no longer comforting but lonely. "You're being silly," she told herself firmly. "You lived alone for 15 years before those bikers showed up. Nothing's changed. Except something had changed, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what. Perhaps it was simply remembering what it felt like to have purpose, to be needed, to have her home filled with life. The distant rumble barely registered at first. Martha turned a page in her book, assuming it was the snowplow making another pass on the main road. But the sound grew louder, more distinct. Not the grinding noise of a plow, but the unmistakable rumble of motorcycle engines. Many of them. Martha set her book aside and went to the front window, pulling back the curtain. What she saw made her gasp. Coming up her long driveway was a procession of motorcycles, their headlights cutting through the early evening gloom like a string of moving stars. Not 15 bikes this time, but dozens. She couldn't even count them all. Her first thought was that Buck and the others had run into trouble again and brought reinforcements. She hurried to the door, grabbing her cardigan from its hook. But when she opened the door and stepped onto her porch, she realized this was something else entirely. The motorcycles came to a stop, filling her driveway and spilling out onto the road beyond. There had to be at least 100 of them, their engines idling in a synchronized rumble that she could feel in her chest. Riders sat astride each bike, many with passengers behind them, all wearing the same leather vests with patches that she now recognized. At the front of this impressive assembly was a familiar figure. Buck cut his engine and dismounted, removing his helmet as he approached her porch. Behind him, like a wave, the other riders cut their engines too, until the only sound was the crunch of Buck's boots in the snow. "Buck," Martha said, confusion evident in her voice. "What's all this? Is something wrong?" Buck climbed the steps to stand before her, his weathered face serious. "Nothing's wrong, Martha. Just the opposite." He gestured to the assembled bikers. "After we left yesterday, I told our brothers and sisters at the other chapters about what you did for us. How you took in 15 strangers when most people wouldn't have opened their door to even one." Martha's eyes widened as she looked past Buck at the sea of motorcycles and riders. "All these people came just to—" She trailed off, not even sure what they had come for. "We came to thank you," Buck said simply, "and to help." Before Martha could ask what he meant, Diesel approached, carrying a large envelope. He handed it to Buck, who turned back to Martha. "You told me you were facing some financial troubles, that the bank was threatening foreclosure." He held out the envelope. "This should take care of that." Martha stared at the envelope, not reaching for it. "What is this?" "Every rider here contributed something," Buck explained. "Some gave a little, some gave a lot. We took up collections at every chapter within 300 miles. It's enough to pay off what you owe the bank and then some." Martha's hand trembled as she finally took the envelope. "I can't accept this." "It's too much." "You can and you will," Buck said firmly. "You helped us when we needed it with no questions asked. Now it's our turn." Tears welled in Martha's eyes as the reality of what was happening began to sink in. She looked past Buck at the gathered bikers, men and women of all ages, some grizzled veterans like him, others younger, but all watching her with respect in their eyes. "There's more," Buck continued. He gestured and Rusty stepped forward from the crowd, along with a tall, lean man Martha hadn't met before. "This is Hawk," Buck introduced the newcomer. "He's a contractor when he's not riding. He and his crew, most of whom are standing right there," he pointed to a group of burly men near the front of the assembly, "are going to fix your roof properly. No more patches. New shingles, new gutters, the works." Martha opened her mouth, but no words came out. Rusty spoke up next. "And I've got my plumbing crew ready to replace those old pipes throughout the house. No more leaks or rusty water." One by one, bikers stepped forward, each offering their professional skills or resources. An electrician promised to update her dangerous old wiring. A landscaper would clear her overgrown property come spring. A carpenter would repair her sagging porch and broken steps. On and on it went, each offer leaving Martha more speechless than the last. "We can't do it all today," Buck explained, his voice gentle as he saw the overwhelmed expression on Martha's face. "But we wanted you to meet everyone to know this isn't just talk. Starting tomorrow, crews will come out in shifts until everything's done." Finally finding her voice, Martha whispered, "Why? You don't even know me." "We know enough," Buck replied. "We know you're a good person who helped strangers in need without a second thought. In our world, that makes you family." He looked around at the assembled bikers. "And we take care of our family." A cheer went up from the crowd, startling Martha. Buck turned to them and raised his hand for quiet. "There's one more thing," he said, reaching into his vest pocket. He pulled out a small patch, similar to those on the bikers' vests, but different somehow. He held it out to Martha. "This is for you. It's an honorary member patch. Only 5 have ever been given out in our chapter's history. It means you'll always have the protection and respect of every rider who wears our colors." Martha took the patch with trembling fingers, running her thumb over the embroidered design. It was the most unexpected gift she'd ever received, and somehow one of the most meaningful. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "You don't need to say anything," Buck replied. "Just know that you're not alone anymore, Martha. Not ever again." As if to emphasize his point, the bikers started their engines in unison, the combined roar so powerful it seemed to shake the very air. They raised their fists in salute to the elderly woman standing on the porch, not a frightened or fragile old lady anymore, but a woman standing tall, her eyes bright with tears of joy rather than sorrow. In that moment, Martha knew her life had changed forever. The house that had felt so empty that morning was now surrounded by a different kind of family, one brought together not by blood but by kindness and respect. The home that had been slipping away from her was now secure, and the woman who had been slowly fading into lonely isolation was suddenly at the center of a community she never expected to join. As the sun set, completely and the headlights of 100 motorcycles illuminated her small farmhouse, like a beacon in the darkness, Martha Wilson realized that sometimes the most extraordinary gifts come from the most unexpected sources, and that a single act of kindness offered without expectation of return could circle back in ways that changed everything. Buck smiled at her, his weathered face gentle in the golden light. "Welcome to the family, Martha,"